Welcome, everyone. I'm Professor Lisa Rockford. I organized this series. If you have any questions, just send me an email. And we will post the link for this when afterward. This event is part of the STEAM Visiting Artists series presented by Broward College North and funded through the Office of Cultural Affairs and Student Engagement. Our speaker today is Liene Bosquê. She was born in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and has a studio practice based between Miami and New York City. Liene was born in Brazil, where she completed her BFA at Sao Paulo State University in 2003 and a bachelorette in architecture from Mackenzie University in 2004. While living in Lisbon, Portugal, she was the recipient of the 2007 Intesa Parte Award, and in 2011, Liene received her MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. She also attended the New York Foundation for the Arts mentoring program for immigrant artists, in addition to participating in the Lower East Side Studio Program and the New York Art Residency and Studios Foundation. In 2016, she received the Emerging Artist Fellowship from the Socrates Sculpture Park to install public artwork in Queens. Her work deals with the exploration of sensorial experience within architectural, urban, and personal spaces, and she has installed numerous site-specific projects as well as community engagement interactions. Her installations, sculptures, and site-specific and performance works have been exhibited internationally at locations such as MoMA PS1, the Museum of Contemporary Photography in Chicago, the William Holman Gallery in New York, the NYFA Gallery in Brooklyn, the Museo de Arte de Ribeirão Preto in Brazil, Carpe Diem in Lisbon, Kunsthal Galapagos, among other spaces in Brazil, Portugal, Turkey, and the United States, and most recently at the Museum of Contemporary Art North Miami. And we'll have time for questions after the lecture, so we hope you'll join in the discussion after she's done presenting. Please also join us on April 15. We'll have one more speaker in the series, Freshta Tusi. So welcome to Liene Bosquê.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lisa, for the introduction. And it's a pleasure to be visiting artists at Broward College. I know our first plans were to be there in person, but during the circumstances we are all going through the social distance, we are doing the talk online. But yeah, I guess the good side of it is that we can open up for more people to join us. And I'm glad to see here in the list people that I know from Portugal, Lisbon, from Brazil. So it's great to be able to reach out a broader audience. So thank you so much, Lisa, for this invitation. And so it's a pleasure to talk to your students from the 2D class and the other students from the Broward College. So, and once again, thank you for your understanding. It's my first time doing this presentation, so I'm going to be shifting from my slideshow to some videos later on, so you see. So hopefully everything the technology will be on my side. So I would like to show you some images, and I won't talk in particular about all of them, but I'm going to be talking about my concepts in general, and then once in a while I will focus more, and then at the end you can ask me questions from specific works if you wish to. So as you can see in this series of work, I work with miniatures, and you see different ways of how I've been interested in the idea of architecture, as this architecture in a personal side, but also historically, and also in our everyday lives. And so a lot of my work, I base it in the history of architecture, but also how we think about that history through what we're going through on the present, and also thinking about the future. And so you will see that coming along in my diverse body of works in different materials and different techniques and iterations that I use. So here you will see, here's a kind of how this past series that I showed you kind of started, because I've started collecting souvenirs from different cities and different stores, as you can see in the image here on in your left, where I could collect visiting cities, or also how, you know, people were giving me miniatures. But from that miniature collection, it started in a really not pretentious way of becoming an artwork. So it becomes as my own collection and my interest of architecture. As Lisa mentioned in the introduction, I studied architecture back in Brazil, where I'm from. And so I'm always been fascinated how we humans build this different kind of shelters and different cultures, and how all of that influences where we are now. And from that collection, after 5 years, I start to look at them as a source for my sculpture project. So here you can see some of my silicone molds that I appropriate from those miniature souvenirs. And in the other image, you can see the casting that I was doing at the time. And in this case, I was using plaster. So all of that came together almost more than 10 years after I had the collection in this piece I'm showing you now, that it took like 15 years to collect all those souvenirs. So when I got to that point, I look at them and I was like, oh, thinking to myself, this is a work in itself. So I decided to appropriate them and show in this way you're seeing in the image, as a way of looking to all that handmade or industrialized miniatures, but to think about those different cultures living together. And also to think about the artist being a collector, and how we collect elements, materials, references to do our own work. And in this piece, I was really, with this piece, I was really fortunate to show that in MoMA PS1 in 2015 during the Greater New York exhibition. And it was a really great opportunity to have my own collection inside of a museum in a contemporary exhibition context. In that way, it made me also rethink about what I was doing before with the other works I showed you previously with my own miniature cities. So that was kind of one body of work, embracing the sculptural elements and the combination of different miniatures and modular and repetition. So that's a lot of the elements that I work on. And you see in this piece and other ones how the history of architecture, it's really important. So a lot of my work, I deal almost, if I'm an archaeologist, of looking to the places, researching, photographing, interviewing people. And you see that a lot of my work is site specific. So for me, that it's a way for me to understand where I am or where I'm presenting the work, considering that context. And then I start to build the work in itself. So also something that is really important to my work is where I'm living influences a lot my work. And you see that, for example, the series I'm going to show now, I was doing in Lisbon while I was living there. And for me, that approach is a way for me to understand where I'm living, since not being familiar with the culture, the history. So in my work, it's a way of this mapping. Oh yeah, that's another point that I would like to consider, because I was invited to this visiting artists series to frame my work with the idea of mapping ecologies. And in this way, I'm framing my work in that relation to think about how I'm mapping the city, the urban environment, and in relation to my personal connections with the city, with the spaces, but also in a more collective way as well, depending on the project. So you see here references of what I was experienced while I was living in Lisbon more than 10 years ago, while a lot of the culture is of drying clothes outside, hanging on the balconies, and also this image that you see on the bottom with the tablecloth. It's a part of the culture that also in Brazil where I'm from, we heritage that culture, a religion culture, where for some processions, when the procession would pass on the street, you would put your most beautiful tablecloth on from your window, and you're going to be watching this spiritual religion procession passing on. So all of those references led me to work on the series of project where I was looking at the architecture as my mode and doing projects where I would spend time in those locations doing. And so basically, for those who are not familiar with the work, to understand, I'm in this series, I was working with latex, and I would brush it on, the liquid latex onto the windows, and then peel it off and hang it with in the same place where I did, or close to it. So you see here in this example that I did in the Natural History Museum in Lisbon in 2007, where my idea was to map the different types of windows that this architecture, this museum has. So for this exhibition, was a group exhibition, a contemporary art show from young artists to be presented in this historical museum. So instead of showing the exhibition space, not instead, because I also show the image that you see on the top from the inside is where the exhibition space with the collective exhibition was. But then outside of the museum, through the museum, I also hang the work in different places. So I gave this map here, sorry, it's in Portuguese, but the map would point at where in the museum the viewers could walk and encounter the work. So in that way, I was really interesting to think about that architecture and that history of that building. And a year later, I did this other project, also in Lisbon, where I used the same technique, but using black pigment. And I could do, I could spend a month in this building doing this work. And something that a lot of people ask me, oh, how you could get access to this building. So in both situations where I would have a group show in those places, and inside, but then I did the proposal to be working outside of the exhibition space and interacting with the building in itself. And this is the interior of the building, and this part is the outside of the building. So in that way, you can see here that my interest with site specificity, it's a lot of looking to what is there, what it's in the real world, and then contextualize that with my pieces in order to look at that in a different way, and bringing a new way of looking at that. So you can see here in the video, hopefully, yeah, you can see it's a little bit pixelated, but you see the movement of these latex pieces hanging outside brought this different life to the building in itself. And this ended up being another piece, a video installation that I did with a short recording of the installation. So you see that a lot of my work will work as a documentation, but also being back as a work. So I do a lot of back and forth with the works in itself. So that was a really important work to my whole practice, and you see how that influences different way. And then going a lot of years after, when I was already living in US, and it's been 12 years that I'm living in US. So I was going back to that idea of the hanging, but in this context was a completely different, because the city is Braddock on the suburbs of Pittsburgh, and it's a town that was mainly built for the workers of the the steel industry, Carnegie Hall industry there. But then with the decline of the industry, the city passed from 20,000 population to a 2,000. So when you walk there, it's really a ghost town. And when I was planning this talk today, I was remembering that, and I was like, wow, that's how it's feeling these days when we go to the street and everybody's at home, and then the streets and the city, it's so empty, and just the architecture. And that's the feeling that the city has most of the time. because a lot of the constructions are empty. Of course, different from what we have now. We know, like, the people, we are in our homes, and we are doing that for the health to stay safe and to keep everybody safe. But in this town, everything, most of the buildings are empty. And so I did a mapping of the churches that are closed. As you can, what you see here, it's a Tyvek hand cutted with the drawings based on the stained glass from the churches that are no longer being used. So the church, the spiritual place, becomes this building, just a building, a closed building. So in this way, I was using the Carnegie Hall Library, that is one of the few spaces in this town that has this the social life. It's where people meet, where they do workshops, events, and also computer reading. So it's like where the life of the city is. So I was really looking at that space as this temple of the knowledge and temple of the community, but then juxtaposition this with this reference of the buildings outside in the town. So then moving forward more to some works that are inside in a gallery spaces, not so site specific. And I was really interesting to think about the materiality of my work, because I spent my time in Lisbon, I spent almost 3 years mainly work with latex. And when I got to when I got to US to do my master's degree in Chicago, the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, I was really interested to think about how I could not being so attached to one material, because I was too comfortable with that. I was interested in see how the material can also be the concept, also being part of my what I want to say, what I wanted to communicate. And that's what I kind of put myself for a while of, I cannot work with, I did a task with me, don't work with latex anymore, so figure out other ways of working. And that opened up my interest in to think about that materiality and what comes and what the material can tell and what the material can say. So you see the difference, the diverse of materials that I use. In this case, plaster and the sculpture on the floor, and latex. It was one of the times I went back to latex. But you see that I would use different materials. For example, this one was a residency I did in Lisbon, in the Carpe Diem. And you could see that those little stones, those little debris are everything I found in this space when I got there. So just to explain a little bit of the context. So Lorenzo Igreja organized this institution that calls, at the time, it was for 10 years, the space in Lisbon, and I was invited to be there. So I working and then presenting this work. So it was a really simple gesture of finding those little debris from the wall, that they were falling from the wall, from those, as you can see in the back, probably some tiles, ceramic tiles that were take it out from that historical place. And I did a mapping of the ceiling. So that is the drawing, that architectural drawing that you can see on the floor plan over there. So you see that my interest in architecture goes back and forth into the shape, the history, the theory of architecture. And in this case, it was a lot about the physical space. And here you can see also that what I was really influenced by when I was living in Chicago was the history of architecture of the modern and before, the modern, before Mies van der Rohe, with Louis Sullivan, where he was saying that the ornament in the buildings are functional. So it's different from Mies van der Rohe that would say, like no ornaments, less is more. But Louis Sullivan was saying the opposite before him, and saying that the ornaments is function because it's also speaks to the building in itself. So here it's homage to one of the buildings that were demolished in Chicago. And here also you have other installation that was based on this building in Chicago. So you see that my inspiration comes a lot about what was built and what it no longer exists. So I will go back and forth looking the history, as well as trying to think about why buildings are destroyed or kept, and who has this power of decision of what it's being built and what remains and what disappear. So I would talk more about this action that you're seeing here, but here is mostly for you to see this Scott period building in Chicago, where this previous work was based on, and looking at this ornamentation. But then translating to different materials. In this case, I laser cut towels and a cardboard. We can talk more about that later on as well. And all of that comes to tell you this other project that I started while I was in grad school in collaboration with another artist, Nicole Seisler. And then afterwards, we ended up taking our own directions with the project. So it's an ongoing project that started 2009 and goes until these days. And that's something you're gonna see in my work. There's a lot of things that comes and I put it in a hold and a pause and then bring it back, and then bring the ideas and the concepts back and then redo it in different ways. So here you can see that basically this work started of carrying clay to the streets and looking for textures, reliefs that could be captured by pressing clay into it. So I'm gonna show a video, and so you understand more how this work happens, and then I will show more images and talk more about it.
City Souvenirs is a series of participatory walks through city neighborhoods where public audiences are invited to make direct impressions of the built environment in blocks of clay. These objects are collected after participants make their imprints. On one side of the clay, it records sharp architectural details, while the other side retains the subtle lines of the hand. This walk on the Lower East Side investigates the history of the neighborhood, looking especially to its diverse cultural and immigrant heritage.
This is like our first stop to think about the Stewart Park as this place where was opened in like in 1903, and then was the first playground, like official playground in the United States. The clay is really soft, so what you have to do is give a nice grip first, but leave some space around because the clay is gonna change around with the shape. So can you kind of find a grip? Yeah. Yes, exactly. And then hold it there, and then you were gonna do one imprint, like you're gonna do slap it into the.
Okay, 4:31, and then we have to put the date
in the right direction. So in the right direction. 4:31.
My grandfather immigrated here in the late 50s, early 60s, and lived and worked in Chinatown. And so I thought it was like really interesting because we were talking about how even though I'm not from New York, and like, you know, and I'll share their story later, other people aren't from here, at some point, someone in our families like come through this entry point, and I think it's so remarkable.
So the project started on the street and mapping different cities and different places. And then after those objects, those clay objects, becomes this map or this space between that was in between the hand of the person and the built environment. So there is different iterations of that, and how how we display the project and how I display the project afterwards. So the gallery space also works as this starting place for where the wax comes and where the clay is prepared, and also the objects in progress. As you can see in this, this version was presented at Frido's Gallery in New York, and something that was really interested too is how to bring that experience that that happens on the street, of the interaction and the social aspect to it, to the gallery space. So in this case, there was a sand table where people could touch the objects and see the imprints on the sand, as well as doing rubbings to see the different texture that was captured. And this other image is a presentation in Peekskill project created by Jody Weinberg, where also a different place, bringing a different place to this upstate New York City, but also going from walk. So you can see the shelves onto the wall where coming new objects from the walks I would do there. And on this center, you could see imprints from the Lower East Side. So this idea also of bringing one place inside of the other by this object also happens. So you see that in this work, it's a big shift between the other works that I was doing, because here the social engagement becomes the priority of the project. So this idea of experiencing the city with others, it's and try to see with the others site, right? And how we can perceive the city in different ways. So this was the walk I did in Sao Paulo, the city where I'm from and where I live most of my life. Also, it's an interesting way to think about how the public respond to different, respond differently from the same project, depending where I am and what culture or how the city navigates. For example, the last walk I did was here in Miami, where I'm living now. And since Miami is a city with, and probably you and Broward, it's similar with that idea of it's being a really not so walkable city, because it's everybody use car to do most of to navigate it from one place to the other. So that was an interesting way of looking to downtown Miami, and perceive the city in a different way. And this was an iteration of the project where I was really glad I could combine my social engagement work with my sculpture project. So this is on Socrates Sculpture Park in Queens, New York, where they have fellowships that any of you can apply with a project. So every year they have a selection. And I was fortunate to be part of that in 2016. And I did the walks with the public that are in the park, and then afterwards, all of those imprints became part of this sculpture project. So you can see here the details, like the ceramics, the terracotta tiles into the sculpture and the interior of the sculpture, and then from the outside you see this brick-like construction. And this project was thinking a lot about the history of that neighborhood, and it was pretty close to where my studio was in Long Island City, and in a place where a lot of gentrification is happening, a lot of the history is being erased, and all the high rises are being built. So I was really interested in look at this and pay homage to this building that exists right under the Queensboro Bridge, that was a terracotta factory. So this is like a miniature version and just the rooftop of it, to think about how the landmarks and things that survives will tell about the history. And in this place, for example, was a place where they were producing a lot of terracotta ornaments that were that are part of the buildings in New York in itself. Another aspect that I want to mention is through this project was really important to me, and with the walks in itself too, it's been a really great way for me to keep a longer relationship with the viewers of my work. Different from when I'm presenting a sculpture that the viewers can come and, you know, spend a short time and leave. When the participants want to be part of a walk or be part of this project, it's a longer relationship. Some people will come to stay like an hour, a couple of hours walking. Some people would stay just for one imprint. But either way, it's interesting for me to build a relationship with the viewer, something that it's really become more and more important to me. So this piece was up for 6 months, and that was the same piece as I showed it in the beginning with the snow. So it was nice to see the different seasons of the year, because it was built during the summer and lasts until the winter. So that was great to see how it changes a lot depending on the season. And then here, going back to some of more personal work that I did in relation to my family history. So to understand my newest project right now. So I can tell you that this project is related to my family back in Brazil. So my grandmother had a really tiny coffee production, and this was the buildings into that land. And she's being a really example for me and an inspiration, because she was the only woman to plant coffee in a place where it was really patriarchal, and she suffered a lot through that, but she was strong enough to keep it going. So when she passed away, nobody in the family would continue her legacy. So I was really thinking about, okay, what I can do to that. And that's when I did this quick intervention there, using the coffee bags, burlap bags, to kind of mapping and almost like open up those architectures. And so I was thinking a lot about her life and her legacy. And you can see in this other piece is also in relation to her passing away, and was the time my family, we had to empty her home. So in that way, I was really interested in mapping and see how mapping, or how to feel that absence. And that was my way of to have a task, or to have a work done to kind of bear with the really hard moment of losing someone that you love so much. So I decided to include this piece and go back a little bit to get to this piece, because this is really related to what I'm working on, my latest body of work, where I'm looking at the hammock. So this piece is also in homage to my grandmother. And so it's the combination between the coffee, the burlap coffee, and to think about the absence of the body in this way. So that I did 10 years ago, this piece. And then later on, more recently, I've been recontextualizing the idea of the hammock. So you see here, that it becomes a totally different from one sculpture, later on become this other social engaged project, where I look at the hammock as this shelter and this place for the body. So I'm gonna show you another video so you will see how this work is engaged with the public and in different locations. So the video you're gonna see now, it was made in Queens.
Wow.
So it's a really beautiful.
It's time consuming too.
It is.
Then with the spread bar, it keeps easier when you were on the beach or in the, because of a lot of wind. We use all materials that were donated for the materials for the art. So when we use a plastic bag.
Let me jump on a little bit further so you can see more of the project.
So depending what you need, you don't want the mistakes to happen. So you have to really pay attention what it is. But sometimes you fix as you go. And you can keep changing it, creating the pattern. So this one is a really intricate and really skill, and you see what happens. So this is made the same way.
You see here more images of that process that you could see in the video. So in this project, I was connecting with different communities and doing long-term workshops every week. I would meet twice a week, or some people would come to the park and encounter the project. So that was a really great way to be in front of the Queen's Museum. And getting participants and people that were visiting the museum, but also people that were in the park in itself. So for this project, and now I'm being really sentimental as well, because the Corona, where in Queens, it's one of the most affected places with Corona virus, and it's a really working class immigrant community that lives there, and kind of it's how New York runs with all that workforce. So it's really sad to see what's going on there. So I want to show more work, and the last thing I'm going to show you is the project, bringing this project to Miami. So the project started on February and had the chance to be up for a month before all the museums were shut down because of the social distance. So you can see here that, let me put my camera back so you can see me. So let me show more pictures of it. So here it's basically with, to explain, like having 3 looms where I'm interacting with the public, and we are building hammocks. Just to go back a little bit, and as you can see, this work is the one more visually different from what I've done so far. But I really find a conceptual connection with the weaving patterns being this grid and being this horizontal, vertical, that kind of the structure that happens in architecture, and seeing the hammock as this shelter and this place for the body to be, as the architecture is. But what I'm really interested in with the project is also in this iteration with the Museum of Contemporary Art in North Miami, as I was able to collaborate with the art education department, with the programming department, and kind of becomes this this fluid between one thing and the other. And so lectures, reading books for kids, as you can see here in the images, or other group visits, or you can come to the installation only to take naps, or or have a conversation. So then the project becomes this ongoing project, and this creating that space for a safe conversation And I was framing and trying to think about this conversation about immigration. So in Queens, when I presented there, was a particular situation, as I mentioned, because of the public that would come. Here in Miami, I think it becomes a lot about how we exchange, or how we from so many different cultures live here in Miami. So there was the hammock as an entry point of how to talk about different cultures, different craftsmanship, and see the similarities and differences between different cultures, and see more of my work on my Instagram at Liene Bosquê. My mail is there too if you have any questions, and my website as well, for you to see more of the videos that I showed you and more images about my work. So I'm gonna open up for questions. I'm gonna allow participants to unmute. So in that way, not everybody is on, because we have like around 60 people. And thank you everybody for being interested in seeing my work and seeing my presentation. But for the questions, I'm doing this. I'm gonna allow you participants to unmute yourself when you wanna talk. And I'm also taking questions on the chat if you prefer to write.
And this is Ross Serrano. How are you? Can you hear me? I just curious about, like, when you do your installations, especially like the ones you show in different parks, are they like commissioned, or how do you choose the places that to participate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. So when I start to do most of the site-specific works in Lisbon, when I started to do that, was because I was invited to be part of an exhibition in those buildings, and instead of showing the work in the group exhibition space, I proposed to do those installations. So in that way, was not a commission, because it was my proposal when I was invited to show my work, and then I proposed to do those installations. For example, the Soccer Sculpture Park, it's a proposal that they have an open call for proposals. So in this way, you could call a commission, because they select the proposals, and then once you are selected with the fellowship, you will build that proposal. So in this way, it's like a commission with the fellowship in that way. So I think those are the projects I worked the most. And then the other ones with this last project was also a proposal base. When I did in Queens, was also an open call that I applied with my proposal to be part of this residency, art build residency. So I guess that's was more through open call, and instead of being commissions. Does that respond to your question, Ross?
Yes, I just was just curious about, like, how you selected, or if they were selected for you, the spaces, or like they say, we would like to do an installation in this park, or building, wherever. But yeah, that question was answered.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. Thank you. Jalen asked me, what was my favorite piece I worked on? More than 15 years that I'm working, so I think a lot of pieces have like a special place in my heart. But I feel like this installation in Lisbon was one that was really important to me, because it opened up a lot of works and the things that I'm doing nowadays. So with the site specificity and being able to engage with the public, with the people that were in this building. So in this case, also addressing the question of Ross. So this was a building that were being used by many artists, studios in Lisbon. And the first floor was a gallery floor where collectives exhibition will be proposed and will be doing, but it's like an informal gallery space. So then I proposed to do this work outside. So for me, that was a really interesting point to think about, and probably was one of the first ones to think about public art in a way, because when I showed first at the museum, most of the works were inside. So you had to enter the museum to see the work. So you had already that filter of just people that are passing or coming to the museum to see the work. While this piece was, I guess, one of the first one that was open, so anybody on the street could encounter the piece, and that is something that will later become really important with the walks that I do. People encountering or not being expecting to see art, and also make people questioning what is this, kind of mixing that real world with the art in itself. So I think that for this reason, this is the project I think was one of my favorites, because of starting make me think about questions that I've never thought before. Some people asking about quotes that I have that I'd like to say. Yeah, of course, I plan to see to tell some quotes, and I haven't. But one of the really important reference to me was that I read a book from Mignon Kwan that calls One Place After Another, and where she will talk about a chronology of the site specificity, but also talking about how in the 70s, a lot of the work was really physical and formal, and the lack of the social engagement, a social and cultural aspect to it. So I feel like that's when I became aware and thinking about, oh yeah, my work, it's so much about the space, the architecture, but it's missing the people, and it's missing the people that make those the place. And I feel like that was a starting point of me thinking about my work through that lens, and how the people becomes how important it is. And I feel like the moment we are going through now, that we are all in our homes and not having the social interaction, it becomes clear and clear that how that is so complicated, right? It's so empty for us, because it's the constructions are here, but if it's empty, right, what is the connection among us? I know luckily we have all the technology in order to do what we are doing now, but we're all like in this need of like being in community, being in society, and sharing that. So that book was really important for me also to realize that, and that's when I start to do more and more of my social engagement project. And another point that I forgot to mention, and that kind of brings back another quote or another reference that I have from Pablo Elguera, the artist and writer, professor, that he writes about social engaged art as a way of putting together the pedagogy, the teaching, the studio practice, and the anthropology all together. And that's how I feel with the projects I've been doing more recently. That is a way of how I can combine, because I'm an art educator as well. I'm an artist, and I feel like with the social engagement project, I can be everything together. I don't need to label myself. I don't need to take my head of being a professor and it's like, okay, now I'm the artist. And the social engagement project brings all of that together. So I don't have the quote specifically, but those references, the book references for me were really important. So, those are, So going back to some of the other questions that I have here on the chat. Someone asking me what type of clay on the white work. So first I start to use, most of the works are porcelain clay. So the clay is done and then waiting to dry, because they're blocks, they're not hollow. So then waiting them to dry for a couple of months and then firing them in a high temperature, so they are porcelain. And then later on, I start to look at the walks and this project that I was doing, the physical imprints, looking at those, how to be more portable and be able to travel more with the project. So then I start to use paper clay. So in that way, we eliminate the part of the firing and all that process of waiting. So with the plasticine, not the plasticine, sorry, I haven't used the plasticine. I've used self-hardening clay someone is asking what type of clay. So in most of the walks, I also start to give to people so people could take it home, the clay, and that will air dry, and you don't need all the process of the firing. How do I finance the time and supplies to these installations and grants and the work and the side works that I have? So I guess like many of the artists, we have to do so many things because the funding is really complicated, especially when a lot of the projects are not commercial or not products, right? So there is different ways. So I've been applying for a bunch of grants and fellowships and opportunities or residencies that will have funding to do projects. Fortunate, this project that I'm doing at MOCA right now of the hamacas that I was able to bring to Miami, I got a couple of grants from Miami, the Locus Project grant, the Wave Maker that is is to Miami-based artists, and also the Alleys, the grant from the Woolite Arts. So all of that, it's helping me a lot to be able to do those projects. And in this side, I'm also, as I mentioned, I teach. So I've been teaching kind of most of the time with my practice on the studio. So also a lot of projects I would fund from my teaching as well. And I do have some, I have done some commercial galleries, exhibitions too. So selling some of the pieces is also another font of income. But I've done a lot of like art handling, assisting other artists, multiple ways of making money. I've been always trying to make it related to the art, and I was lucky to be able to have that experience. So in that way, it was building up onto my perception of the art world. Sebastian is asking, your work is very cultural focused. Does religion ever play a part in your work? If so, does it create any conflicts creatively and culturally in a gentrified area? For example, in South America, churches are usually the most culturally important and beautifully built constructions in a town. Yeah, that's a good point, Sebastian, because I'm connected. I like spirituality for me is really important, and of all of that plays. And when we think about colonialism and how the imposing this other culture to in other cultures, right? So being from Brazil, we live that on our skin. And even though like I'm from immigrants that came from Italy and Spain to Brazil, so I'm kind of part of that gentrification and a part of that change. But at the same time, they were immigrant after the war, coming to look for a better life, right? But of course, if you were looking back to the colonialism era and all of that imposing of a culture into the natives, so all of that, it's a really it's something that I've been more and more conscious. And I feel like this last project that I'm doing with the hammocks is the one that it's really touching on that, because the hammock was how the natives in Amazonia, in Caribbean, in South America, Central America, used to sleep or would sleeping. And then the colonial era brought the bed, and how that the bed changed completely the way of a lot living together with the religions, and we're taking the natives' beliefs and rituals and all of that. So but then so it's a lot to think about. So I try to be aware as much as I can, and open up for those conversations. So the hammock project, it has that idea of how we look at to different craftsmanships in different countries in Latin America, and how that bringing us back to that importance. So how we are as a nation or different cultures, but also having this critical way of looking at what happened, and how nowadays how things are so integrated together that sometimes it's hard to say, but I guess I try to point that in a poetic way in my work. It's not so visible, but it's I think in those themes for sure. and those situations. Okay. Someone else is asking, Sarah is asking me if I still work with miniatures. So as I mentioned to you, I do a lot of back and forth with my work. So I stopped a little bit of the mold making and the studio practice to focus more in my social practice. But it's always something that I will go back to. So I get tired one body of work and then I go back to a different one. And the same happens with the social engagement project, with the studio project. So I guess the miniatures have this studio component, me being by myself in my studio. And I like to shift that because after a long project, like a project being social engagement where I'm talking to people all the time and engaging as it was happening here at MoCA, I get really tired and I'm just like, okay, now I need to be in my studio. And then when I'm in my studio for a while making my own sculptures, I'm like, oh, this is too solitary. I need to engage with people. So it's why I kind of, I never say, oh, I've finished, I'm done with miniatures. No, I will go back to that at some point.
One of the other questions earlier on was, what are you working on now or for the future? Like your next project?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what I'm working now is the hammock project. That was a month ago, right before the museums had to shut down because of all the issues with the virus and the COVID-19. So that is what I'm working on. So everything is in the museum right now. So the project was meant to last one more month. So the idea was that the weavings will be done. So more hammocks will be hanging. So we would celebrate that. And this project is an ongoing. So that's another thing that I'm going to continue this project in the end of the year here in Miami in a different location. So that's what I'm working on now. Making this project the different locations to it.
Related to the hammocks, I saw that in your previous hammock installation, it looked like there were found materials like maybe recycled plastic or other elements. So do you specifically use specific types of materials in the hammocks, or is it mainly traditional weaving materials?
I was fortunate during the Queens Museum, the images that you see now, I had access to the Material for the Arts, that is a nonprofit institution in New York that will provide we recycle materials from companies and people that are donating any type of material. So they have access to nonprofits projects that if as long as you're connected to a nonprofit. So the Queens Museum brought me there, and I could find. So all the materials I used for the hammocks were I found it there. So they're all recycled, like ribbons and threads from that particular, what I could found. But I also use plastic, as you mentioned, in a way to think about how, the sustainability, what materials we are using and how that affect the world we are in. So the plastic was using plastic bags as the weaving was also one of the points. And I wanted to explore more of that later on, and how we can transform materials to not sit in the landfill, or like, of course, thinking first how to not use plastic, but you have to use, or how we can reuse that, and if not, like how we can recycle that. So yeah, it's something that I want more and more being more and more aware of the choice of material and the sustainability. So it's something that I want more and more to be focused on.
There's a question on the chat section. Sarah Canola is asking, how can we be part of one of your projects?
Oh, okay. Thank you for going back to because I don't know why here I cannot see the other questions. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going to happen or when the museums are going to be able to open again. So we still stand by to see if the project will continue or not at MoCA. But I still don't have a location, but by November, hopefully we will be able to do this other iteration of the project here in Miami for now. And I had a schedule solo show in a residency in Lisbon for the summer, but yeah, right now everything is still being on pause to figure out what's gonna happen, right? Yeah, so so in that way, and it's always like something that I want to mention, that all the projects, not only the participants, but everything happens with so many helps, and then with friends helping, family helping, like the support of my husband, like everybody involved to be able to make those work. So someone asked about how I make the work possible. So that's also something I'm just remembering now. I couldn't do it without the support of many people helping me to do that. Yeah, so that's something I forgot that it's really important to talk. And yeah, so hopefully I can go to my website when I have the next iteration of this project, so you can hopefully visit. For those in Broward College here in Miami, hopefully you can visit the project soon, and I'm open to bring this project to different places as well.
This has been fascinating. We thank you so much for your flexibility in doing this online, since it was originally supposed to be face-to-face. We have a few more minutes if there are any last one or two questions.
Yes, this is Catherine Lysick. In South Florida, the word hammock has a slightly different meaning. I mean, it actually is kind of a fertile area that is of higher ground. It's characterized by hardwood and vegetation, a very rich kind of humus soil. Does that in any way relate to your choice of titles here in South Florida?
I was not familiar with that that term for a hammock for the nature, or for what you describe it. So I moved it to Miami a couple of years ago. So that's when I heard for the first time, visiting the Coconut Grove Park. And it was a nice coincidence, because I named the project mostly because of the hammock in itself, a name in Spanish, since my goal, it's mostly talk about Latin American cultures, and the hammock of being this element that stands for the natives of Amazonia and the Tainos and the Caribbean. But I really enjoy how that ground, or how the fertile ground for nature, with this other meaning of the word, also goes for what I'm looking for in my project, where I'm looking for conversations in a safe space for people to talk, or to be this a life ground for transformation and changes through the making of the hammocks. So it was not intentional, but I thank you for bringing that up. I feel like conceptually it could be connected, but it was not intended at the beginning. It was just because of the hammock in itself.
Just a quick question. Do you have any like permanent installation, like even like if you have work on one you were like working on the architectural part of?
Actually, no, they're all ephemeral. The one I did on the park, in the Socrates Sculpture Park, was the one that leave it for a longer time. So it was for was up for 6 months, but it's even though being made of bricks and a concrete foundation in a really sturdy way, so people could climb on it, that was meant to be temporary, because the Socrates Sculpture Park, they have every year, they have new fellows that will come, because the park was meant to be this ongoing ground for sculpture and experimentation. And the other pieces were mostly temporary. So the ones that are permanent are the more object-based that I keep showing other times in different exhibitions as well. But hopefully soon, and I feel like that's, someone asked about the future, I feel like something that I would love to work on, and I feel like it's my next step in my career, is to try to have a commission or apply for public pieces where that can last for a longer time and being permanent.
Do you have any dream projects if you had a huge budget, or it's some kind of a fantasy budget?
Ooh, that's always like rare to have. So it's like, ooh. Yeah, I guess we'll be connected to that idea of having something permanent that I could have for a longer time, and also to give access to people that usually don't have access to art. So I think I would, do it that in different in neighborhoods and places where there's no access to art. I think that I don't have like a specific project in mind, but yeah, that would be such a dream to be able to do whatever I want, and not have the limitations we all have, financially or all of that. So yeah, that's a good question. We're going to be dreaming about that ideal situation, and should start working, think about a project for when that day comes, if it comes. If I'm teaching now, so I'm teaching at FIU, Florida International University. I'm teaching 3D foundations. Prior to that, I was teaching at Temple University in Philadelphia on the textile department and fibers and material studies department. So the teaching it's also being a really important part of my practice in the studio, and how I navigate or things I research and I pass on to my students, and it's things that I'm interested in the studio, and things go back and forth also between the classroom and my own studio. So I'm glad that I started this year. I started teaching here in Florida, so I'm glad to be back on that. And now figuring out about the how to teach on Zoom and how to teach online, how to teach sculpture. So that's another challenge that I guess all the faculties, professors we are facing, especially when we are teaching physical, right? I was teaching I was teaching how to use the power tools in the wood shop, and mold making using plaster and molds. So that it's really a challenge when we don't have the facilities. So now I'm adjusting to this situation of not having the studio spaces in the school to teach.
Again, Liene, and everyone for tuning in, and I think we'll wrap it up. I think the questions are paring down, so thank you everyone who could watch, and we will post a link on the Facebook North page, and please share that. If you get the link, share it with anyone you know that would want to watch that. And we have one more speaker on April 15th, which we will share the Zoom link for that as well. So thank you again to Liene, and feel free to send her a message on her website or email if you didn't get a chance to talk with her today. All right, have a good day, everyone.
So much. Thank you so much for being here. I can see people from New York, from Miami, and in Brazil as well, and Portugal. So it's really great. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Lisa, for this opportunity.